Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Day 6 of May is for Magazines event. I'm going to continue reading from Everyman, his life, work, and books. Today, an article from Friday, February 7th, 1913. It's issue number 17, volume 1. And it still had a price of 1 penny. And I'll go through just sort of a more general, first of all, description of the contents, or specifically this issue here. It starts out every week on the first page, a brief summary of the previous week, and it's called History in the Making, Notes of the Week, and it was written by the editor, Charles Sorley, but it didn't have his name on it. In this one, it's mostly to do with the Balkan Armistice expired on the Monday before, and the House of Lords rejecting the Home Rule Bill on Thursday the previous week, and the sort of more or less consequence of that. And there's a specific article by Hector McPherson, which he was the author of the previous one I read, but this was the problem of the slums. And then we got The Labor Revolt by H.G. Wells, A Russian's View of Russia, no author, George Bernard Shaw as the Champion of Capitalism, An Open Letter on the New Copyright Bill by Charles Sirens, The Present Position of Women's Suffrage by Mrs. Henry Fawcett, and it basically goes into the promises that the government had made to have a bill, but it just didn't happen, and then the Labour Party coming along to say that, they won't support any bill unless women are included in it, or to that effect. And then an appreciation of Mrs. Henry Fawcett by Mrs. H.M. Swanwick, and then a portrait of Mrs. Henry Fawcett, and then a continued literary notes, which was a feature of every week. Masterpiece of the week, and this week is The Rise of the Dutch Republic, Motley's Rise of the Dutch Republic, and A Few Facts Concerning Imprisonment by Thomas Holmes, and The Practical Teaching of Literature, The Nationalization of Education, The Trial of Joan of Arc by Henry Mazel, and Silhouettes, Correspondence, and Book Reviews. And I'm going to read A Few Facts Concerning Imprisonment by Thomas Holmes. I want to put before the readers of Everyman a few facts about prisons and prisoners, in the hope that they will prove as startling as they are important. Fact 1. During the decade ending 1910, about 1 million of people were in England and Wales alone committed to prison because they could not forthwith pay fines imposed upon them in courts of summary jurisdiction. Fact 2. Every year, right up to the last date for which figures are available, more than one half of those committed to prison have been committed for the same reason. In other words, they were put in prison because of their poverty, not because of their criminality. Fact 3. 15% pay or part pay their fines after they were in prison, the law allowing a pro rata payment, a reduction being made in the amount payable according to the days served in prison. Every portion of a day counted as a whole day. This means that friends raised the necessary money and obtained their release. Fact 4. A large percentage of the prisoners thus identified were youths between the ages of 16 and 21 years. During 1911, 10,380 males and 1,506 females under 21 years of age were received into prison. Fact 5. 1,548 of these young people were sent to prison for offenses against police regulations or for breaches of bylaws, and 1,427 for vagrancy or offenses against the poor law, non-criminal offenses. Fact 6. That the London courts furnish an abnormal proportion of committals. 1,341 youths under 21 years passed through Pentonville Prison in 1 year, 1910. During the 2 years, 1909-1910, 1,791 youths of similar age were committed to Wandsworth Prison. Of those imprisoned in Pentonville, 947 were given sentences of less than 1 month, many being sentences of a few days only. Fact 7. That a large portion of these young offenders had the option of paying fines, but were unable to pay forthwith. That many of their offenses were of trumpery kind, including pitch and toss, selling newspapers in prohibited places, kicking footballs in the streets, disorderly conduct, bathing in the canals, etc., etc. Fact 9, that the prison commissioners tell us that nearly 40% of first offenders committed to prison return to prison more or less frequency and help to form the army of prison habituals. Fact 10, that the prison commissioners frequently tell us that the prisons are largely peopled by the very poor and the ignorant, the weak, and the afflicted. Fact 11, that prison is at present the one great corrective for the offenses of the poor and the one grand specific for their delinquencies. Fact 12, that these frequent and unnecessary imprisonments have largely destroyed the primary object of prison, all fear being removed, familiarity breeding contempt. Fact 13, that the system of fines is in principle just if time is allowed for payment and the amount is not prohibitive. The maintenance of public order costs money, and offenders against it ought to contribute towards the expenses incurred. Fact 14, that time after time different secretaries of state have sent strong letters of remonstrance to all the magistrates, warning them against the evils of prompt committal to prison, and asking them to use the optional powers they possess of giving time for payment. On October 3rd, 1912, Mr. McKenna also sent a strong-worded circular letter to the same subject, but at present the ruling principle appears to be your money or your liberty. Fact 15. Persons who have designedly robbed others are often dealt with under the Probation Act, and thus avoid all legal punishment. But prison is the fate of the poor who have committed non-criminal offenses and cannot pay at once. Fact 16, that imprisonment should be the final resource of the state and not the first. Next week I will deal with serious crime. And there's actually a little poem that fills up the space there. I think there's time I'll read another one. It's the Practical Teaching of Literature. It's a letter basically to the editor of Everyman. Dear Sir, having had the privilege of reading in proof the article on Motley in this week's issue, I venture to make a practical suggestion in connection with your new series, The Masterpiece of the Week. I have no doubt that this series might be made a very important feature in your paper and of invaluable benefit to teachers and students, and that it might be used as a means of training the critical faculty and of developing the literary appreciation of your readers. To achieve that desirable consumption, it would be necessary, one, that in each case you should ask definite questions, whether those questions are explicitly raised in the paper or whether they are implicitly suggested by the book under discussion. 2, that the readers of Everyman should be invited to answer these questions. 3, that Everyman should discuss those answers in a subsequent issue, insofar as the answers are relevant. To make any meaning quite clear by a concrete illustration, I would submit the following questions in connection with the paper on Motley's Rise of the Dutch Republic. 1. With regards to the spirit and purpose of Motley's masterpiece, it is the writer of the article correct in calling Motley the historian of European liberty? Would it not be more appropriate to call him, like Freud, the historian of Protestantism, or does the writers see any fundamental difference between the purpose of Froude and that of Motley? 2. With regard to the impartiality of Motley, does the writer sufficiently discriminate between the lower and negative form of impartiality or neutrality, which refuses to take sides or to espouse any cause, and on the other hand, the higher or positive kind of impartiality, which proceeds from the sense of justice and generosity, and which is equally fair to friend and opponent? Judging Motley from the higher point of view, can he really be regarded as impartial? For instance, do the readers of Everyman not think that he is singly unjust to the murder of William the Silent? Is he not blind to the magnificent heroism and formidable fortitude of Balthasar Gerard? Generalizing my question, is Motley not sympathetically unjust to the Spanish side? It is credible that all the men who are on that side are unmitigated scoundrels or bigots or imbeciles. With regard to the literary value of the Dutch Republic, what are Motley's specific merits as to portrait painter? Can it be said that all portraits are equal to true to life? Shall we accept artistic fiction, or is it, or as true as history, the portraits of Charles V, of Philip of Avia, of Egmont, or Vigilus? 4. The writer points out 4 blemishes in Motley's style. 1. Redundancy and lack of brevity. 2. Rhetoric and lack of ease and restraint. 3. Monotony and lack of verity. 4. Floridity and lack of simplicity. Can the readers of Everyman select passages illustrating these blemishes? To enable them to follow the discussion, I would suggest that for the purpose of reference and questions, they should use a definite edition, either the edition of Everyman Library or any other edition announced beforehand. I am convinced that if questions were proposed and answers given to these lines, we would come much closer to the critical appreciation of the masterpieces of the week under discussion. I am Sir, etc., Sigma. That was kind of interesting. I have a feeling that was probably written by somebody from Dent, because they mentioned, let's do this education thing, but let's read Everyman edition. So everybody goes out and buys a Dent edition to do this. But you get the feeling, you get the picture that it was very sort of. It wasn't a conservative paper by any means, and I think that there's a term for it, but it's the idea of it's called redistributionism or something like that, where the idea is that you should redistribute the wealth, and I think that's the idea that this Everyman is sort of coming from. And it does seem like it's dealing with those subjects. But also in 1913, it's taken seriously views of women's suffrage, and education for people, and seriously looking at, just because you're poor, you're not poor so much, but you're an everyman, doesn't mean you can't learn, you can't think. So let's structure something that you can think, and hence that letter. And then also the letter on the prisons, not letter, but the article on the prisons, of showing that the system is unjust towards poor people, because the people in prison aren't actually criminals in a sense. They're just people that cannot pay their fines. So it's a very interesting. I find it a very, very interesting paper, and each issue is like that. But it's like I did do a search online. WorldCat, it seems to be in a few libraries around the world, but not many. There are some. If somebody's interested, if they went to archive.org, I think there's some of the issues that's been put up there by a library. But it doesn't seem to be around or very frequent. And to me, it's an immensely interesting paper. You can argue, it's too far to the left, it's too too far to this and expecting too much of the general reader. Those are all, arguments you can have, but it wasn't meant to be, as Dent had said, a serious literary criticism. It was more meant to be introducing things to the Everyman, and also to raising his sales of the reprints, but anybody else's as well, because he does have advertisement in there of other publishers as well. But no, I just find it a very interesting magazine. We may return to it again. We'll see, but I will leave it there. If anybody wants any other information, please do not hesitate to ask. I'll try to answer as much as possible. As I say, it's early days with me with this magazine, because there's so much in it, and it's from 1912 to 1916, so there's a lot of issues, weekly issues. And as you saw, there's H.G. Wells, there's a lot of big writers throughout. Anyway, take care, BookTube. I will see you next time. Bye.